Manpreet, thank you for joining the Invisible Condition podcast. We met many years ago. I actually brought your organization, VEZA Global, into the organization I was in to do a diversity audit. And so I just love the work you're doing. And I know you're very outspoken and very open about the invisible conditions you live with. So I knew that it was just natural to have you on the podcast. So thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so excited about the work. I mean, we met like back in 2020, and it's been so exciting to see your journey. And I'm so glad you're getting these stories out there and kind of end the stigma around invisible conditions as well. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's ending the stigma. It's a big, lofty goal, a big, lofty vision, and some people have questioned it, but more people are behind it. And I'm just grateful to have your voice behind what we're trying to do. So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the conditions that you live with?
For sure. So the conditions I actually live with are concussions. I've had 10 concussions, which is not fun. It's really impacted my life in many ways. And I have Lyme disease and endometriosis and other autoimmune conditions. I grew up when I was 5 years old. I had an autoimmune disease where my muscle cells were attacking themselves. So it's been something that I was one of the rare, and the amazing thing is every time I'm like one of the people that recovers from, like the rare people that recovers from these conditions. So dermatomyositis, only 6,000 Canadians have it. And I was one of the 3% that actually fully recovered as a juvenile. And then, ended up all the concussions and everything else. And so from that, and actually my diversity inclusion work didn't actually start because of the conditions I live with. I've always just, I didn't even know I wasn't diagnosed actually until like 5 years ago with a minor brain injury, and 3 years ago with the Lyme disease. I just lived with chronic fatigue, exhaustion all the time, and just not being able to really function in life what I thought was normal. I pushed myself a lot, which led to multiple burnouts. So now I do equity, diversity, inclusion work, looking at systemic change within organizations and how to create organizations that actually help people thrive. I was focused more on gender equality and race, like that's where my work started. And as I've been diagnosed, I've started to bring in more of this invisible conditions as well, because it's such an important piece. And now lately, the conversation's been a lot around perimenopausal and menopausal women, because it's been somehow just being in an age bracket I am, and we're looking at women's health in the workplace as well. So it's been exciting work to talk about topics that no one else wants to talk about.
It's so important to be talking about these topics that nobody wants to talk about. And it's still just, I don't say blows my mind or frustrated with it that we just don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about diversity, inclusion, or as you'd mentioned, menopause in the workplace, which is an important conversation to have in the workplace. And why do we shy away from that? Why do workplaces say, you know what, let's we want our people to thrive, but we're not going to talk about these topics?
Well, the flippant answer is because we have a lot of certain types of men in organizations that don't feel comfortable talking about these topics because they've never been exposed, unless they have family members who have been dealing with it. And then I find that the conversation is completely different. They're very open, and they really want to engage and create a different world, a different place to work, or because of the personal connection. But we need to get to a place where it's not just about from personal connection that we want to create change. We want to create, which is amazing when we do want to create from personal connection as well. But it needs to be just for the betterment of society in general. And I mean, I know that there's a lot of topics out there that are hard to kind of focus on. There's so much going on in the world, and there's so much, so it's hard to put where your energy goes. But this is where, if we actually create systems where everyone can thrive, we can actually focus our energy on creating a better world as well. I'm a little bit of an idealistic person, so I believe that we can create a better place. But the systemic change, I think, doesn't happen because people are just uncomfortable, and people are not okay with being uncomfortable, but also because they're not emotionally attached to it, and they don't understand the experience of someone else. And we're so disconnected in society, as like in this individual society that we live in, we forget that our neighbor might be dealing with something drastically different, that they might actually need us to say hello to them, or they might need that extra support to go to the grocery store, or they might just need that job to help them pay their bills. And that doesn't mean that they do just entry-level work because they have a disability, but it could mean that how do we work on their other strengths so they can actually contribute in a productive way in the way that feels meaningful to them and meaningful to the organization as well. So there's so I think it just goes back to people not knowing and the discomfort as well.
People don't know. You're absolutely right. The discomfort, it does make people uncomfortable. I was talking with somebody who is in the HR field who was diagnosed with something, and they had said there was just so much nerves and emotion and fear wrapped around having to disclose to their workplace because it dramatically impacted their work to a place where they needed to disclose, and they didn't feel necessarily safe or trusted. The outcome was positive, but it took so much emotion just to get to that place. And if we, like we said, we create systems, we create these places, whether it's in the school system, in our family system, or in the workplace, where somebody discloses and we say, thanks for trusting me with that.
Yeah.
Let me know what support you need, and we'll get that. That's it.
And I think that's actually the space that we need to start looking at is how do you give people the tools and the conversation pieces so that they can have these conversations. I think a lot of the time the discomfort. I just had a conversation with a client on Friday, where she was just like, I don't know what to say, so I don't know how to put it into words. So when when someone discloses they need accommodations, I'm like, I don't know how to respond to it. And if we give them the language, I think that will change a lot of how people feel about disclosing. I have many friends who are like neurodiverse, and they're just like, I don't want to tell my employer because then they're going to think less of me. And and I know that even now when I disclose, like I'm open about my conditions because I'm like, I don't have anything to hide. But I know I get reactions from others where they're like, are you really going to be able to handle this, or is this going to be too much for you? I'm like, that's not the question to ask. Like, I know what's too much for me, not for you. It's not for you to judge how it's too much for me as well.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Are you going to be able to handle this? Are you going to, are you going to be able to see this through? Versus, hey, thanks for trusting us with that. Thanks for disclosing, Manpreet. We really appreciate that. Let us know how we can support you, because we want you to thrive. And we know by you thriving, our organization is going to thrive. So that's a language we need to adopt. And somebody said to me recently, we were talking about a complex topic, and their answer was, you don't need the answers. That's the answer. You don't need to have all the answers. Be honest. Hey, thanks for trusting me with this. I honestly don't know what our policy is, or don't know how to respond. But you know what? I'm going to go and find an answer for you. So hang tight.
That's the best answer. Like when people just claim that they don't know something, it's actually the best answer that you can give to anyone, regardless of what the situation is. Like, I just remember, like, even with a friend, I was dealing with the loss of my brother, and I had a friend. She's like, I don't really know how to support you right now, and I don't know how to be there for you. And she's like, I don't know if I have the capacity. And I'm like, I had so much more respect for her, because she was just like, I don't know what to do. I don't have the capacity, and I just want you to be well. And she's like, that's all I can provide for you right now. I'm like, hey, that's the best you can do. And I think, like, that answer, even though she was able to do nothing for me, but what she did was set up a boundary, but also just claimed what she was and wasn't able to do. So I wasn't, and actually, like, years later when we did reconnect, our relationship is just as beautiful as it was back then, because we both had created the space that we both needed for ourselves to flourish. And then when you do that in the workplace, you're actually creating space for yourself to flourish as a manager. You're creating space for yourself to flourish, and also go and get educated on how you can help this person, but also someone else. And it's actually a really amazing thing, because there's a learning opportunity, because otherwise we get to the day-to-day and it gets kind of boring. And then now there's like this great learning opportunity about how do I address this to not make this a challenge for someone else, which is like the best way to do it, I think.
I find that, and I do this, I'm really guilty of this, is just wired to provide a solution.
Yeah. Oh, right? Completely.
My kids get hurt, or my kids are struggling with something, and I want to provide a solution.
Yeah.
I want to help them out. And I keep finding myself and correcting myself. And it starts there with that awareness that if somebody is disclosing, whether, again, it's at school or you're with your friends or your family, you don't need us to provide a solution, because you might not know what the solution is. So instead of trying to fake it, and I love what your friend did, was they acknowledged it, they honored it, and were completely honest and transparent and say, look, I don't have the capacity right now.
Yeah.
And you remember that years later. You still remember that.
Completely. And I love the fact that you just said, like, it is about the fact that you don't have to always provide the solution, because we're actually, I had to like learn this for myself, because I'm so used to just like, okay, I can get this done. I can get this done, which is also being like from a feminine core. That's a very masculine way to do things, where you're trying to overpower someone else and like not do it in a way of connection, but you're actually disconnecting from the person when you're trying to take away from someone's experience. If we actually like, look, I can be here with you. What do you need? And how can I support you? All of a sudden, you're actually harnessing a deeper connection with the person. And you're also creating a space for them to feel more empowered and make choice in their life, and make a choice that works for them rather than a choice that works for you. And that's actually really powerful to have at that as well.
Yeah, you think about who's at center of the conversation. Right? As soon as you say, hey, I live with multiple concussions or Lyme disease, and somebody's going through their mind and going, okay, I read something about concussions, and so as soon as Manpreet is done talking, I'm going to offer this as a solution.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden the person on the other end, or person who's listening, is not actually listening. I mean, this is classic coaching technique, is that act of listening. I call it authentic curiosity. Put away the noise, put away that assumption that you have an answer, and just get curious. And I would love to back up a little bit. You said you were diagnosed with something when you were 10 years old. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that diagnosis, that condition, that invisible condition.
Yeah. So it was actually 5 years old. It's
5. Okay.
dermatomyositis. And it's where your muscle cells, how I was explained, it was muscle cells attack themselves. And it was, so yeah, the moment when I found out I was going to get diagnosed, it was interesting, because it was a cold day, and I still actually remember this moment. I was walking to school, all bundled up, and all of a sudden, and for some reason, my mom was like looking from the window that day, which usually never happened. But anyways, I walked across the street, and all of a sudden I fell, and I didn't have any power in my legs, and I couldn't get back up. And I was just sitting there in the cold, cold snow, and it was so cold. And I remember my body's just shivering from it, and it was just like freezing. And I'm like feeling like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because I can't get up. And I'm like looking around. There's no one else around. For some reason, I used to always walk with someone, but that day I didn't. But all of a sudden, my mom like saw that I hadn't gotten up, and then she like ran across. She's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I can't move my legs, and there's nothing. I just can't function." So, anyways, that led to diagnosis. Led to like, my mom was like only 24 at that time. It led to her to like, like when you love someone, you do things so outside of your, like, you're going to do anything it takes. She like drove on the Coquihalla Highway for the first time from Kamloops. And she's like taking me to all these doctors. She's like, I need to get, a solution for my daughter. At the time, they had put me into surgery because they didn't really know a lot about this condition. And it made me gain like 30 pounds as a child, like in a month, from prednisone. And it impacted the rest of my life. Like, it impacted how I was able to move. I couldn't really play with kids because I couldn't run the same. I was actually, for a couple months, I just didn't even really walk. And I remember that, they used a lot of ancient, like, Ayurvedic techniques on me, like the almond oil and things like that, things like our grandmas used to use. And that's the only thing that was working to actually get energy back in my legs. And so it took me a couple months, and I got recovered, and to their surprise, and they're like, okay, it's under control. Then I had remission 2 years later. Again, like, completely destroyed everything about my life and confidence and stuff like that. And then the third time I had it, and I was fine again. And then the third time we were in Paris, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't feel so well. And my mom's like, okay. And so there's certain conditions. They would look for like a rash on my joints, and like, how I was feeling. My mom's like, oh, you have a rash. Like, this doesn't look good. So we cut our trip short. We went back to Canada, and lo and behold, they're like, oh, it's flared up again. And I didn't want to go to school, because this was in August, and I didn't want to go to school because I was like, I've gained so much weight all of a sudden from the prednisone. You just blow up. and you're grade 7, like your confidence is impacted, your body image, like, and so I actually, my mom called the teacher and she's like, Manpreet doesn't want to come to school because she's scared that the kids are going to make fun of her. Can you, like, what? And he's like, okay, I'll talk to the kids before she comes. And so apparently, so they did. They talked to the kids before I came. Like, she's going to look different than what she did last year, and whatever. And it was really positive because everyone was really, like, no one ever asked me about it. They were just like treating me the same as they always did. And it was really interesting because, like, after that, I started playing. I got the concussions after that, but I started playing ice hockey. I didn't know how to skate. I started and I was on the basketball team at school. Played volleyball. I became, like, super active, and I actually wanted to be an athletic therapist for Team Canada Women. And I had, like, the Team Canada Women's team actually taught me how to skate. So it was really a great feat when you're coming from, like, not being able to use your legs to coming to a place where the women from Team Canada are, like, teaching you how to skate. And Hillia Wickenheiser was the first person who taught me to skate. And when I met her years later, she was like, I totally remember you. And I was like, what is this woman doing? She's like 16, doesn't know how to skate. She's at, like, trying out for BC Summer. I was at a hockey camp at that time. I tried out for BC Summer Games, but it was also, it gave me, I just remember as a child, people would always, like, look at my parents and be like, is she okay? And I'd be sitting right there and no one would talk to me. It was like I had become invisible. As soon as I got the disease, I became invisible. And I was so tired of people only connecting to me because I was sick. And I felt like I had so much to offer. And it was interesting because I just had a Tony Robbins weekend, and I realized that I was still using that connection of sickness as a way to still connect with people, even though that was when I was 5 years old, because I thought that's the only way people would love me, because if I was sick. And it's not true, but it's so interesting to how, as a child, that got imprinted on me, thinking that that's how I can connect to people and how they relate. And when people only see you as being sick, they forget that there's so much other aspects of you that's available to get to know and become curious about, that when they define you as that's all they define you as, they forget, they don't actually get to know you then. And that's where, like, afterwards I had to really, like, I was like, I became so public, right? Like, the way that I show up in the world, because I'm like, there's so much more to me rather than me having a disease. And so, yeah, so it was really interesting experience.
There's so much more to you than just having a disease. Oh man, if somebody's listening to this and that's what they're taking away, just take that away. There's so much more to you than just your disease. And I've said this numerous times, and I'll continue to say this, is my normal looks different than your normal, right?
Yeah.
Your normal was, hey, you weren't able to walk. It was in remission. You're able to walk. I'm going to learn how to skate. I'm going to just go. And that determination, was that your kind of defining moment of, like, you know what, I'm not letting this slow me down?
What's so funny, because I never thought about it until, like, recently, where I was like, I didn't realize I was so determined, because I just did things that felt right. And I was like, I want to do something, I'm just going to do it. And I'm really supported by my parents, because, like, I was like, I want to take ballet. My parents would put me in ballet classes. I did tap, I did soccer. Like, it was always like, my parents are just like, okay, go try whatever you're doing. But it was also like, whatever my heart desired, I just did. And I think because when you realize that you can lose it in a moment, and, like, whatever that is, I think I just kind of made a decision to really fully live life in a way to live a full life. And so nothing really kind of stops me. Over the years, as I get older now, the fear has creeped in. Now I'm like, oh, do I really want to get back on skates when I can't skate? And I was like, no, my feet hurt. Like, so different. But yeah, but that determination is something that has, like, shown up as a great trait of mine. And I think it has to do with the fact that you just realize that life can change for you in a moment. And it literally did change for me in a moment. And that you just want the next moment to be everything that you want it to be.
What you said reminds me of a previous guest on the podcast, Sean Bernstein, he's a hemophiliac, and he said his parents made a decision, and he said it was either pad the world or pad the child.
Yeah.
And his parents said, you know what, we're going to let Sean run wild. And so he said, even in his childhood house, his parents still live there. There's tape and foam still around some of the corners, around the fireplace, and things like that. And it's like, you know what, I want you to have the most normal, quote unquote, normal life as you can. And so have fun. And he said that was a defining moment. He still remembers that, like that gave him that confidence and has instilled confidence in him. And it sounds like your parents did that as well.
They did. Like, I remember when we were at, I mean, I didn't realize my mom had like overcome her fear of driving on the highway to like take me to the hospital in Vancouver. But I remember like when my dad would come visit me, and it was always like, he'd bring me this, like, give me this stuffed toy that I actually still have somewhere. And, but it was like this moment that they're just like, it's your mindset that's going to make the difference. It's nothing else. Right. And then they were just so positive about everything. And I mean, they were pretty beaten down. Like, this is hard to watch your child go through any condition and what that looks like. But I don't actually remember them being ever stressed about it, even though they were. Like, it wasn't something that they never stopped me. They never stopped believing that I can do anything. And I think that helped me believe that I can do anything. And I think that's where it goes back to, like, when people believe in you more than you believe in yourself, like, that makes the world of a difference. And I think I got that from my parents. And I remember that, like, being in doctor's offices, and they're just like, oh, she may not be able to have kids, or she may not be able to walk again. And my parents are like, no, she'll be fine. And that was it. Like, there was no like question about it. So,
wow. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. The caregivers in our life, big shout out to caregivers who are there, who stand by us, who walk life with us, unwavering, and sometimes wavering, because we're human and things get hard. But that's a testament to how you were brought up and that determination. I love that. You know, what I know about you is it seems like you put your mind to something and there you go. And, you know, I would love if you can just tell us a little bit about 10 concussions. I've known people who've had a few concussions, maybe have had to stop, you know, mountain biking or riding a motorcycle from their second concussion or something like that. And 10 concussions, and how has that impacted your life, or has it impacted your life?
Drastically has. And but it's also interesting. I wonder. So the first one was when I was in grade 9. I dropped a deep fryer over my head. And then grade 11, I walked into a sign, so I have a dent in my head, like a physical dent. And then 2 weeks later, misjudged where the boards were because I didn't realize I had a concussion, and I was playing ice hockey. Misjudged where the boards were, fell on the ice. Then a couple months later, a friend dropped a hockey stick on the head. 20 years to the date, almost later, me and my cousin were playing ball hockey because we started playing ball hockey to honor my brother. And he hit my cousin is full muscle. We banged into each other, and I fell on the floor, and I'm like, my head just bounced, and I was like, oh, this is not good. But it was almost 20 years to the date. And there's a reason why I'm mentioning this. And then a couple of months happened afterwards. One was like my niece just tapped me on the head, and I got a concussion because at that point my brain had, you know. And the last one I got was I was living in the Netherlands, and it was a windy day, and the door flipped open and it hit me on the head. And all of these, after a while, what happened was I didn't realize that it wasn't until 2018 when I was like, I had friends. So 2016, when I got like a series of like 3 or 4 concussions, a friend was like, you need to go get a baseline done. I was like, no, I'm fine. He's like, you should get a baseline because he's like, your brain's going to start getting impacted. You need a baseline. And so I put it off. But I was like, I didn't realize I had gotten really light sensitive at the time. And I was just getting overwhelmed all the time. I had a lot of anxiety. Haven't slept in years. Like, I still haven't slept in years. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then fast forward, I had to leave my job, and I just like up and quit, like emotional decisions, you know, made right in the spot, which is a sign of like concussions as well sometimes. And I quit my job and I left. And then 2018, I finally went to a neurologist, and he was like, look, I don't believe in concussions, but you have minor brain injury, but you actually seem to be functioning pretty well, but you shouldn't really be working anymore. And he's like, your brain's too far gone. You shouldn't be working. I was like, well, that's not going to happen. But I was really busy, and I have burnt out 3 times. So I couldn't figure out why I kept burning out. Well, so after he told me that, and I started to research it, and I was like, oh, like, so a lot of my life of like where I try to stay in the dark, or I feel constant nausea, I feel constant motion sickness. I was like, this isn't normal. So I ended up, a friend was like, had just dealt with concussions. She was like, you need to go to a neuro-vision therapist. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. And she's like, I'm like, no one told me to go. She's like, you should go. Go to the neuro-vision therapist. Within 5 minutes, she's like, how nauseated do you feel all the time? I'm like, all the time. Like, it's horrible. And she's like, yeah. And she's like, do you feel like you're on a boat most of the time? I'm like, yeah. Like, I don't think the ground's ever stable. Like, and I fall constantly and all these things. And she's like, that's all symptoms of your brain and your eyes are not communicating. And so I'm so glad I met the neurovision therapist, and because it just made a world of a difference for me, literally. I was able to, and she worsened the symptoms. So I was on bed rest actually when my company was growing, because I was on bed rest because I couldn't, they made the symptoms so much worse. And at that point, I only had 7 concussions. And then 2019, at the end of the year, I met this chiropractor who started doing physical testing because I was finally able to get to the physical part. And she's like, you can't be in like rooms with light. And I'm like, no, I'm like, if I get overwhelmed, I get overstimulated. And then I finally had language for it. I just thought I would just get irritated and shut down emotionally because I was like a horrible person. But it was like, no, it's actually because of the concussions. So I'm like, my entire life, I've had become emotionally overwhelmed, like within like 5-10 minutes of being around people. And it was actually not to do with me having not limited emotional capacity. It was because I had concussions. And then I find out, like, partnered with Lyme disease, it adds on to it. And then it's actually made, like, this is part of the reason why I stay single, because every time there's people around me constantly, I get overstimulated. So being in a relationship wasn't something that I could do. And so with the chiro, it really helped. We got to the physical parts. And then it wasn't actually till I got to Netherlands, where I met a personal trainer. He was amazing, and he was in kinesiology. And as he would he started getting me movement again, and I was like, because I missed working out because I couldn't work out anymore. I used to play hockey, I used to play sports. I sucked at everything I played, but I still used to play. And now all of a sudden, I was barely able to get out of bed. And so then when I went to go work for the UN and in the Netherlands, it was a great opportunity for me to I'm like, okay, let's focus on myself. I don't know anyone in the country. I can actually focus on my healing. Met this personal trainer. Then someone introduced me randomly to an osteopath who was like 10 minutes, a 10-minute walk from my apartment. And he was a game changer. Within 5 minutes, he was able to diagnose me with like things that no other practitioner was able to do. And I was like, and he actually released like so much tension from my brain that I won't get concussions again, hopefully, fingers crossed. And then he introduced me to another trainer who was able to get me strength back in my legs, which was not like possible, because I've always had weak legs ever since I was 5. And all of a sudden I started getting strength back. But the last couple of years, because I've been on bed rest so much, as through the recovery period and additional concussions, I've missed out on a lot of life. Like, I literally took myself out of my life at Vancouver. I moved to the Netherlands to be by myself so I can heal. You know what I mean? It was amazing because I got to work for the UN. I made all these new friends and I did all these other things. But I traveled a lot, but I also had to physically take myself out of a space where I had too much emotional stimulation, and too much physical stimulation. Vancouver's, you have to drive. I'm not really even supposed to be driving anymore because the driving overstimulates my brain. And if I drive for any more than an hour, I'm out for the next day. And so it's also means I can't really go to a lot of parties. I used to party hop every night, like every weekend. And I can't go anymore because I can't function with the lights and the sound and the strobe lights. And so it's meant that a lot of people are disappointed by the fact I don't show up. So it's really impacted a lot of my relationships. It's impacted my lifestyle. It's impacted, like, I spend way more time alone than I ever would have liked. I'm an introvert extrovert, but I've had to become okay with the fact that people, and also like we live in a society where I feel like people just don't have time, and they don't have time. And if you're sitting, like, I've been on bed rest multiple times, other than like maybe like 2 or 3 friends who came to visit. Other people don't come to visit. And I think that's one of the things that's been the hardest, because you realize that those people, like, you have a lot of people that aren't really friends. And that's really disappointing to me. And so it's kind of like made me really question what relationships mean as well.
Thank you, first off, for sharing that. I am so grateful that you found the support that you needed. The trainers in the Netherlands. Little side note, that's a place me and my wife and we'd love to spend months in the Netherlands. I'm from the my My dad was born in the Netherlands. My wife and I went once, and I still have a lot of extended family there. So it's like one of our dreams to go. So you've lived that so I'd love to maybe over coffee or, something we can, I just want to absorb all of that. But to be able to recognize that and say, you know what, this is an opportunity to focus on me. Somebody again recently said, it's like, they said it was time that I choose me.
Yeah.
And choosing yourself, getting that support. But he also said something that's really important, and I think impactful, is you weren't able to go to those parties and socialize like you wanted to or you used to. And you realized that maybe some of the people weren't your friends or they didn't have time.
Yeah.
And again, if somebody's listening to this as maybe a caregiver or somebody who lives with something that's invisible, and your condition is very different than my condition. And we need to have that mutual respect and that understanding and saying, hey, I've noticed that you aren't attending these parties. Tell me more. What's going on? What works for you? And thanks for walking us through that. That's quite the journey. 10 concussions. And then you've got Lyme disease as well on top of that, and all the symptoms of Lyme disease. And yet you're building, and you've built a global impact company. You've worked for the UN. You've done you've done a lot. And
Yeah, I have. But I think sometimes it's because I wasn't diagnosed early enough, because the Lyme diagnosis came 25 years later, that I didn't label myself. And I just thought, and so once I started healing from the concussions, I found actually there was a really great naturopath here locally that helped me figure out like that I needed neurofeedback and stuff, and I was able to recover from. Even now, after the 10th concussion, like my clinical psychologist who I work with on the concussions, he's surprised on how healed my brain is, because I use a lot of biohacking, things that have worked for me, in different modalities, and it's been amazing that I've been able to heal my brain. But then I couldn't figure out why I was still tired. So I ended up having this random conversation on a webinar, like listening to a webinar. She was talking about like always being exhausted. I'm listening to her and she said something about Lyme disease. I'm like, I don't think I have Lyme disease, but let's just talk to her. Let's have a consult. Functional medicine expert from Texas. And as soon as I talked to her, she's like, I'm telling her, she's like, I think you should get tested for Lyme. I'm like, I'm like, no. And then all of a sudden, I call my mom. I'm like, did I ever get bit by anything when I was younger? She's like, well, you were bit by a flea. And then my cousin was in the back and he's like, no, you were bit by a tick. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we were on a hike. You were bit by a tick when you were in like grade 6. And he's like, this is what it looked like. And your mom wasn't able to take it off. And I'm like, and me and my mom had no idea, like remembered nothing. So I go in, I went to my another naturopath, and I was like, can you test me? Yeah, I had 4 of the 10 strains of Lyme, because it mutates within your body afterwards if it's untamed. And then I started the protocol, but it made me so sick because it actually makes you like, for me, when I was the die off symptoms, it made me choke on myself, like choke constantly. So I couldn't sleep because then I was choking while I was sleeping, and then obviously could have something else could have happened. So when I moved to the Netherlands, my mom didn't know, but I conned her into coming a week later so I can start my medicines, because I knew I was going to have this choking reaction. So at least she would be there with me as I'm having it, so I can balance it out. I still have Lyme, because there's such a long process to actually heal from it. And I mean, it's going to take a couple, like you can never heal fully from it, just by managing it. But the beautiful thing is, like, for me, it's just something that is making me just like, okay, I'm using this as a tool on how do I learn about health. I'm a practitioner in Ayurveda. I've learned so many other, like, I know about plants and herbs and how they actually heal our body. And so it's become a really amazing experience, and using this as a way to like heal. Like one of the best trips that I did was me and my dad went to Nepal, to learn how to make Ayurvedic medicines. And me and my dad are both a part of our documentary for it. And, and so talking about the ancient foods and how they impact our body, and how they heal. So it sucks in many ways, because it's hard, because some days I can't get out of bed building out this large global company, but some days I'm like, I just need extra time to myself and I need to sleep until noon. But on the other hand, when I'm productive, I'll be super productive. And so even right now, I was telling a close friend this morning, I'm like, I'm having a productive time because I haven't been able to work for 4 months because I was telling you I had a cough. I haven't been able to work for 4 months because I had an autoimmune reaction to having an iron infusion. And so I've been exhausted for the last 4 months. We've had lots of losses in the family, and I haven't been able to work for 4 months. And as soon as I was able to start working, so now I'm like, I don't know how long I'll be able to work. So I have to be productive during this time. So yesterday I put out a guide, finished another chapter of my book, and it was like super productive because I have the creative juices. I don't have the brain fog because I don't know when. I know that usually like the bouts for Lyme are every 3 weeks, and right now in a good stage. And lately they've gone like a little bit longer, so I'm like, I got to use this good stage until the bout comes again. And it's interesting running your life this way because I don't make plans more than a month in advance because I don't know how I'm going to actually feel. But it's okay though too, because it also keeps my life spontaneous.
I love that, the spontaneousness of just going, okay, we've got about 3 to 4 week window here. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? What are we going to get done? And was there a moment where you decided like, okay, I'm going to be productive in those weeks versus letting that disease and these concussions and conditions play the opposite effect on you?
Oh, totally. So I care a lot. Like I am driven by the impact I want to make in the world. At 13, I decided I wanted to end sexism, racism, and war. At like age 13, no idea why, but that was what I decided. So everything I'm doing right now is in that field. And so for me, it's not even an option to be like, yeah, some days I do feel sorry for myself or I feel like a victim and I'm pissed and I'm mad at God. I'm mad at like the world. I'm mad at everything else. But then I'm like, there's a reason why I was put on this earth and I have to make my life, meaningful and leave my own legacy in a different way. And how do I do that? And that's where like the impact. And I also find that when I'm helping, like, it was interesting because I just moved back to Vancouver. And one of the things is like with diversity inclusion work, it's heavy, it's hard, and it's like it takes a lot. And you're also having tough conversations all the time. And I was like, I need to just go and like volunteer in the food kitchen. And I was like, I need to give back because I need to realize that how gifted I still am, how grateful I am for the life that I have, and the ability that I'm still able to go and do all these other things. And it just have like step away from my ego around. I can sit here and feel sorry for myself, but I'm like, I have the resources, I have the finances, I've been able to get support. I know most other people can't, and this is why I want to, like, we were chatting about how we need to advocate for change for, how invisible diseases are looked at and the support that are needed, and what other access to therapeutic ways that they have. Because I was lucky, and I was able to have all these resources, and I've been able to work when I, even though I'm been told 5 years ago not to work. But that's not everyone's story. And this is where like I talk about it so I can end the stigma. I talk about it so we can actually create change in terms of like the types of benefits that are offered by companies, by the government, what gets clarified under the medical plans. That's why I think that work is so important and it needs to be done as well.
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge that, yeah, there are bad days.
Yeah.
Not every day's a good day. I have, like you, I'm sure I've had many bad days. And it was weeks ago, I woke up just in a bad mood, just not feeling good. And I had a bad day and I allowed myself to have that. And the next day I said, you know what? Get off the couch.
Yeah.
What can we do? And whether that is just having a shower and hanging out with a friend, a partner, your kids, whatever that looks like, acknowledge those bad days and make an impact on those good days. And I know that, as you said, sometimes that's a privilege. Maybe we're in organizations that we are afraid to disclose, afraid to ask for an accommodation because we know that there's going to be some discrimination. And I hear you. I feel that. I see you if you're in that. And I feel grateful that there's people like yourself, Manpreet, in this world who are advocating for change, who will end the stigma. And so you've had to advocate a lot for yourself over your life. And for someone who is struggling with advocacy or with advocating for themselves, what would you say to someone?
You just have to do it. I mean, it's hard. Um, it's uncomfortable, as we talked about, and it's also, but you matter. Like, it's also remembering that you matter. You're worthy of advocating for yourself. You're worthy of getting the support you need and the resources you need, and you matter. Like, I think that's like the reminder that all of us sometimes need, that you are not your disease. You are not the condition. You're living with it, but you are not that person. There's so much more to you. And so you deserve to have to experience all of life in the spectrum of life that exists.
Yeah.
And when you're advocating, make sure you have your medical, like, I wish I had done this years ago, but having my medical history written, because like, this is most things that we take for granted, but having your medical history written, the doctors you've talked to, the medications that you've done, and the impact that the facts that you've had on those things. And I struggle with this all the time, but I know my diet is one of the major things. If I change my diet, it would change how my process of everything. Sometimes it is easier to just be like, I'm going to eat a bag of chips, or I'm going to eat, junk food, rather than make that healthy meal. But the food is, for me, is something that I struggle with. And I found ways that I needed to ask for help with my family, or ask for help from like other friends, and be like, when I need to be held accountable for this, because I think that's hard, the hardest thing for me. And being vulnerable with with insecurities that you have, but also knowing that when things are tough, that you are supported. We're lucky if we live in the Western world. We are so lucky with the resources and the tools and the organizations that are there to support us, even if we don't have the family and friend support. And then plus there's communities like listening to this podcast, but also there's communities of people that are out there that can support you as well.
What's come to mind is that saying that asking for help is a sign of weakness. And we got to change that. Asking for help is actually a sign of strength. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of, hey, I know I can't do this on my own. And I've recognized that. So I need help, whether that's, again, with school, workplace, whatever, wherever
Yeah.
you are.
And it goes back to when someone doesn't know what to do, it's not a weakness for them to say, I don't know what to do in this situation. I don't know about this. It's the same thing. If we're expecting them to be strong about it and, claim that they don't know, it's the same way that we have to ask for help too. That we have to kind of step into our strength and ask for it as well.
Yeah, I love how you just brought that back full circle, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a sign of strength. It's a sign of honesty. It's a sign of vulnerability, which I argue, and I would say that vulnerability is your strength, because it's who you are, and we got to stop hiding our normal. And I'm curious, as we wrap up, Manpreet, what's your vision? What's your plan? And I know you're building your business and you've got a lot going on. You're writing a book, and I'm just curious, where do you see things going over the next, I don't know, 4 or 6 months?
Um, I don't know, actually, to be honest. I've kind of just surrendered. As I mentioned, I just moved back to Vancouver. I do have the book. I writing, and I've been, starting to, because I've learned so many things over the time. So I'm actually developing like a university of different courses, like around womb leadership, so people can tap into their own creation, the womb, and looking at how to like move past like ancestral and eternal lineages, and how to use the power of the wisdom of your body. Grief and leadership is something I've been talking a lot about, because grief impacts, like, I've had so much grief around what I can and cannot do, loss of my brother and things like that. And I've been published in Chicken Soup for the Soul around grief. So it's something that, I've got grief and leadership. And then going back to like the primary, like, women of color in the workplace, and how do we get them to leadership from a holistic leadership perspective, where they're not getting burnt out. That's really my focus, like coming back to that focus again. I still do the audits for organizations and the systems, and we do assessments. But I want to support individuals more in feeling that they're not alone. Because I feel like that feeling of loneliness is getting worse in this world. And how do we foster that not to be present, in different ways? So that's really where I'm at right now. And also I'm working with a startup, and we're looking at future of work, and looking at how burnout impacts healthcare workers, and how to reduce that as well. So it's everything kind of comes back to, how do we support individuals to thrive in the workplace,
Mhm.
and what does that look like? So, and in their own personal leadership. And that's I decided at 13 that was going to be my work, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. I'm still doing stuff on public safety and like, not in chemical weapons anymore, but like in other ways. I work with a lot of organizations that are paramilitary, and so it's great to be able to talk about gender equality and race in those paramilitary organizations as well.
You're an inspiration to me, Manpreet. You truly are, knowing from that young age, and you're still on that path. Man, at 13, I just wanted to get into as much trouble living on a farm as I could and not get caught. It's not thinking about the global impact that I could make. But here you are sharing your story, and you just continue to ignite that fire in me. And for those who are inspired by your story, who want to connect, who just want to learn more about who you are, how can someone reach you?
The best way is LinkedIn, actually, just LinkedIn Manpreet Dhillon. And then you can go to our website, Veza Global, because there's a lot of stuff on there. I'm just rebuilding the website, actually. That's where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing because I have to rebuild the entire, rebuilding everything right now. So that's great. But yeah, Perfect. LinkedIn is the best place. And then happy to always connect. And I love hearing people's stories. So
yeah, that's great. And we'll put those notes, we'll put those contact in the show notes as well. And I think we'll have that all there, as well as wherever you listen to your podcast, we'll have the links in there. So Manpreet, I know you're busy. You've taken time to share your story on the Visible Condition podcast, and I really appreciate you. And for those who are listening, thanks for tuning in. We will end the stigma of invisible conditions by igniting voices, and your voice matters. And so if you have a story to tell, reach out to me. If you are inspired by this podcast, please send it to all your friends, your family. Please subscribe. That really helps us get noticed as well. And if you have the means, Invisible Condition is being built as a nonprofit. Everything that we take in is going directly back into this project. So if you have the means, please consider donating to keep this podcast as well as other podcasts up and running. So with that, Manpreet, thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me.